Yeah, I'll be talking on endometrial hyperplasia. Well, it sounds like a simple topic, but when I was talking to Professor Quinn earlier on, it can be a bit confusing. So essentially, I'm going to cover these topics on pathophysiology, risk factors, classification, accuracy diagnosis, current treatment, and whether what are the alternative treatment modalities that are out there. So as you're aware, this endometrial hyperplasia is a possible precursor of cancer. And typically, in clinic setting, I think everyone has encountered patients presenting with abnormal uterine bleeding, and sometimes even an abnormal PET smear that picked up this problem. And the incidence is up to 10% in women with atypical uterine bleeding, and of course, they're easily diagnosed with endometrial biopsy. So, it's been shown that unopposed continuous estrogen stimulation can cause this problem. In 1996, in JAMA, in the PPI study, showed that estrogen therapy versus placebo for patients on estrogen only went up to 27% had simple hyperplasia, 22% had complex hyperplasia, and 11% had atypical hyperplasia. However, the exact mechanism in which estrogen's role of transformation of pre-malignant disease is still unknown actually. Although we know from molecular genetics that there are some genetic alterations associated with hyperplasia and type 1 endometrial cancer like MSI, microcellular instability, defects in DNA mismatch genes, PTEN tumor suppressor genes, and PTEN AKT pathways. Okay, but I think this slide is rather important because the risk factors for development of hyperplasia, other than estrogen-only therapy, which I think nowadays nobody uses it anymore, for patients with intact uterus, but as what Professor Quinn has alluded to earlier, obesity. See, for patients with a BMI of above 30 is 4 times the risk, but above 40, which is a more frequent problem that we see nowadays, is up to 13 times the risk of getting this problem. On top of that, of course, you got PCOS, which is also a pretty common problem that we face as gynecologists. Functional tumors, which is not so common, but I think another big problem we face in this part of the world now is diabetes as well. I know in my own country, our minister actually declared war on diabetes 1 year ago. Yes, because it's a very common problem in Singapore as well now. Other associations, of course, will be use of tamoxifen by breast cancer survivors, and other epidemiological risk factors, late menopause, puberty, high-fat diet, long family history, of course, those with Lynch syndrome, and even smoking. Okay, so this classification has been used for many, many years. The WHO 1994 classification, and even up to today, pathologists still use this one. Oh, this is a new one, which I'll show later. And essentially, it's based on 4 levels, based on 2 criteria, which is glandular crowding, nuclear appearance. So you got your simple, complex, simple typical, and the complex atypical. However, there's a problem of poor reproducibility and inter-observer variability. And of course, I think people are also familiar with this slide. This one is on classic risk of malignancy by someone in 1985. This is one that is found in many textbooks, where you know that the patients with simple hyperplasia, the risk progression is actually almost is nothing, it's only 1%. Whereas patients with complex atypical, it goes up to 29%. However, it's interesting to also note that the regression for these problems, even patients with atypical hyperplasia can get a spontaneous regression of 57%. It's quite interesting. But those without atypia, the regression is almost 80% actually. Of course, there's also the newer EIN classification, which was put up in year 2000. And this one uses computerized image analysis and is considered a carcinoma precursor. And cancer can actually be considered interchangeable with atypical hyperplasia. And studies show there's 45 times risk of progression to carcinoma compared to 7 times that of atypical hyperplasia. Okay, so in 2008, Lacey published this interesting data on 20-year follow-up of 7,947 women with endometrial hyperplasia. And they looked at the absolute risk, which you can see below, where they found that patients with non-atypical endometrial hyperplasia, the risk of malignancy is actually less than 5%. Whereas for atypical hyperplasia, it's 20% after 20-year follow-up. So in 2014, the classification is simplified to 2 levels now, where you get hyperplasia without atypia and atypical hyperplasia. And then The WHO 2014 criteria also endorses the EIN classification. So they're put together with atypical hyperplasia. It's supposed to improve inter-observer reproducibility and hopefully can lead to standardization. But when asked by pathologists about this, not all of them actually adopted this criteria. A lot of them still use actually the old WHO 1994 criteria. I don't know about in Malaysia or other countries, maybe the same situation. So diagnosis is simple. Of course, you can is through office endometrial biopsy or DNC. And however, we know that the uterine cavity is only assessed in 50 to 60% of the time. So, and also hysteroscopy alone is also not 100% accurate in predicting hyperplasia. And ultrasound, of course, we use 0.5 millimeter for good sensitivity, but it can still miss even those type 2 cancers. And this study from GOG 167 showed the limitation of endometrial biopsy. In fact, several studies showed that the range of concurrent cancer that can be missed on a biopsy, it can range from 70% to 52%. The GOG 167 was a larger one, which is a prospective study of 289 cases within the community or hospital setting, diagnosis of atypical hyperplasia. And all went under hysterectomy within 3 months, and they found that 42% of their cases actually had underlying cancer, and 30% of them actually had mild invasion. So that's a limitation of endometrial biopsy. So, of course, so if you have a patient with atypical hyperplasia, maybe you might want to discuss the patient whether you want to do a formal hysteroscopy and that is if it's just an office biopsy. So they don't miss a cancer diagnosis. Okay, now to management. So for management, of course, it depends on the patient's symptoms, the presence of atypia, and surgical risk, as well as the fertility wishes of the patient. Unfortunately, the optimal dosage of progestins used, actually nobody knows what is the optimum regimen actually is, because there's no randomized trials. Really, there isn't, right? And but however, fortunately, right, even though there's no optimal dosage, but most women do experience regression, right, within 3 to 6 months of some form of treatment. So for oral progestogens, of course, these are two most commonly used treatment around the world, northistrone, and you got your methoxyprogesterone. Also, there are other types as well. But nowadays, we know that if you give a continuous regimen, it's actually better than if you give cyclic. I'll show you some studies later. Cyclic treatment is really not good at all. So give what costs 3 to 6 months. Then of course nowadays most people will start to use this, right, the levonorgestrel releasing intrauterine system. First reported in 1987, but since then many studies have shown that it's actually more effective in treating hyperplasia, with more than 90% regression within 2 years. And of course there's a meta-analysis of 7 randomized trials and as well as observation studies suggesting that this form of treatment is superior to oral progestogens, especially cyclic progestogens. However, as mentioned earlier, the dosage of progestogen use is not fixed, and many studies also use pretty low doses, like 10 to 20 milligrams per day. Let's look at a larger study which was published in 2014 by Albo. It was a multi-center randomized trial with 170 women comparing the levonorgestrel system versus the cyclic one and versus continuous. They used only 10 milligrams in their study, but yet this time continuous methoxyprogesterone showed the efficacy of 96% in causing a regression. But with cyclic, you can see it's very poor, it's only 69%. So in the conclusion was that the treatment with continuous oral progestogen over 6 months is actually comparable to that of the levonorgestrel IUS system. Okay, now I'll quickly run through what are the other forms of treatment that's also published in the medical data, right? On top of the usual means of treating. Way back in 2001, there's been papers on use of intravascular progesterone therapy, right? IMPA for 3 months, and it showed a 6% regression rate in this trial. And then for the GnRH also in 1999, it's 85% regression rate after 6 months for the non-atypical hyperplasia. And more recently, people are interested in the use of aromatase inhibitors. And we know this used a lot frequently in patients with breast cancer. But recent studies have shown interest in the use in the endometrial hyperplasia as well as early cancers as well, because there was some clinical response demonstrated. In a recent study I saw in the medical literature in 2017, some groups were comparing Maggie's versus letrozole in simple hyperplasia. They used a low dose of Maggie's of 40 milligrams versus letrozole, and that was interesting to note that there's equivalent response in the treatment. Of course, this is just simple hyperplasia, but this is a proof of concept kind of study. So more studies are needed to show whether it's useful in the use in other forms of hyperplasia. Otherwise, even for Visane, people have also tried using Visane, and they showed that there's some response. And even JDS, yes, you know, the low dose intrauterine system, same thing. And it also showed a response in non-atypical endometrial hyperplasia. This is a very small study, just published recently. Okay, I've gone to the more important problem, which is atypical hyperplasia, because this is one that is really a direct precursor of cancer. And up to today, I think if the patient is diagnosed with this problem, usually the definitive treatment is a hysterectomy. However, of course, if this problem is diagnosed in young reproductive women, then of course, the two main forms of treatment is essentially again oral progestogens or the levonorgestrel releasing system. But the progestins that we use conventionally are of higher dosage. So we use the progesterone acetate about 160 milligrams to 320 milligrams per day, or 600 milligrams, 300 to 600 milligrams of hydroxyprogesterone acetate. Regression rates, meta-analysis show that the regression rate is about 85.6% for atypical hyperplasia. But when they did the analysis comparing between the oral progestogens and those on the intrauterine system, so they saw a difference. They found that those on the levonorgestrel intrauterine system had a higher regression of 90% compared to 69%. But however, the problem is, when compare a system with a fixed dose of progesterone versus many studies which shows variation in progesterone's dosage, whatever, then of course this meta-analysis will be taken with a pinch of salt, of course, because you're not comparing standardized progesterone usage. Relapse rates, on the other hand, I think regardless of whichever method they use, after successful regression, right, patient must be informed that there's a 26% chance that the problem may come back later in the future. Okay, let's go on to talk about other adjuncts that can be used to help patients with atypical hyperplasia. So metformin is something which people have started to use in the last decade or so as well. Because interestingly, we know it's used for diabetes, but people have shown that it could have anti-proliferative, anti-invasive, anti-metastatic effects as well. It's quite interesting. And this recent study from Japan showed that when they added metformin, right, there was actually an 81% complete response, the treatment after 24-36 weeks of usage, and relapse was only in 3 patients out of this group of patients, giving a relapse-free survival of 89% over 3 years. Quite interesting study. However, so there was a meta-analysis also recently on all the various studies that have been done on this metformin, and they found that this is associated with a reversal of atypical hyperplasia to normal endometrium with decreased cell proliferation around marker ceiling from 51% to 34 to 51%. However, metformin, there's some very common side effects. Why some people stop taking it because nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, taste change, and some even get lactic acidosis. So they monitor the liver as well. So this meta-analysis actually concluded that metformin may assist actually in the reversal of atypical hyperplasia to normal endometrium. Of course, they recommend prospective and mass trials. Cochrane review, on the other hand, concluded at present where there's insufficient evidence to support or refute the use of metformin. So we highly await the anticipated FEM trial, which hopefully will results come out soon. Okay, in my hospital, we face the same problem, I believe, with many other places where we have people treating this atypical hyperplasia with either cyclic progestogens on low dose to even up to 98. But nevertheless, we had the 60% response rate in 30 patients who underwent medical treatment between 2009 to 2012. Most patients actually underwent hysterectomy, of course, and the concurrent cancer that we found in this group was actually 26% for patients who were diagnosed with aplasia on biopsy, whether it's a DNC or outpatient sampling. And we didn't use Mirena, because at that point in time, I think the use of Mirena was still not proven yet that it was useful, because Mentalis came out in 2012. So since then, in 2016, we have actually put in place a standardized protocol for hospital usage on the use of progestogen ligase, as well as Mirena for atypical hyperplasia. Likewise, I believe everyone's also aware that there are also many international guidelines now on the use of this levonorgestrel IUS system and progestogens, like for example the RCOG guideline that came out also 2 years ago. I won't be showing those guidelines, but you can refer to them on the internet. Okay, so what do we do then after successful treatment, right? Because after that, we can't just leave them alone, isn't it? Because let's say for patients with non-atypical hyperplasia, after they complete the treatment, we put to do a biopsy to make sure that indeed the animation has gone back to normal, and then initiate preventive measures, right? Isn't it? Because the patient is obese, whatever, you should recommend exercise or something. If the patient is high BMI above 40, actually systematic suggests that you should refer them to bariatric surgery. Actually, it does help to reduce your weight. To also help. In fact, one review suggests it may reduce the risk of endometrial cancer from to 0.4% after bariatric surgery, by 1.4%. Yeah, and of course, some patients have other underlying causes like PCOS, thyroid disease as well. You have to treat those as well, because otherwise the problem will just come back again and again. Yeah. And so, in a post-menopause woman who has persistent hyperplasia, of course, it's fine to do a hysterectomy, to consider hysterectomy for the patient. For atypical hyperplasia, it's pretty similar. We re-biopsy again to make sure that the treatment works, treat the underlying condition. And most studies show a median time of regression of up to 9 months actually for atypical hyperplasia. It's successful, right? The person who's considered managed can want to pursue fertility options, right? If fertility is delayed, then please institute some form of preventative measure. Just continue with the Mirena or something, or continue with oral progesterone if the patient doesn't like to have intrauterine system. Okay, the problem is when to repeat the biopsy. Nobody knows, right? In my hospital, we do it once a year. Let's just be sure that there's no underlying hyperplasia or cancer. Because I've seen patients who develop endometrial cancer despite having Mirena. So this is something that you have to take note. And of course, if they're persistent, despite all the treatment is persistence, then of course we need to consider definitive treatment for the patient. Relapse rates after ceasing treatment, up to 41%, right? Within 24 months of ceasing treatment, patient can relapse, 41%. And relapses have been reported to go even up to 10 years after stopping treatment. So we need to maintain therapy, and long-term surveillance is recommended. For the preterm relapse, again, BMI. Okay? If they're fat, then the chance is high. Okay? So that's why you go to many sites they show this. So obesity is really a problem. So you must tell the patient to try to lose weight. People also look at immunohistochemical markers, biomarkers, like progesterone receptors, showing it may be of use, but some other studies show it's not used. So of course, this is still debatable. How are we going to use the new immunohistochemical biomarkers to predict relapse? Okay, if the patient does relapse, then how? Then if the patient does want to have a hysterectomy, recent studies from Japan, just published this year, talking about retreatment. Interesting. So retreatment, and both groups use the hydroxyprogesterone high dose. They found that actually patients can be retreated again with a good response rate. However, even after response, the recurrence rate is also higher as well. So it's 6% recurrence rate compared to 40% after initial treatment. Yeah, and pregnancy rate is lower too. After initial regression, the pregnancy rate is about 29%. But then in the retreated group, this group showed that the pregnancy rate is even lower at 11%. And so patients must be informed that retreatment doesn't mean that you're going to have a healthy baby after that. So the fertility rate is even lower. Okay, so in summary, so only atypical hyperplasia is a real problem, right? Because they are the ones with the high risk progression to endometrial cancer, up to 20%. Okay, due to limitation of concurrent diagnostic methods, concurrent cancer can be missed in up to 42% of patients with atypical hyperplasia, as shown in the GOG 167 study. Meta-analysis suggests that the levonorgestrel IUS system is superior to oral progestogens for treatment of non-atypical hyperplasia. If you use oral progestogen, please use a continuous progesterone therapy. Don't use cyclic, it's useless. Okay, cyclic therapy is not good. And you must always treat the underlying cause, right? In particular, obesity. Okay, very important. Role maintenance therapy is also very important to prevent relapse. For atypical hyperplasia, of course, hysterectomy is still the mainstay, but if the patient is young and wants fertility, of course, can use a levonorgestrel IUS system or high dose progestogens. And for the other methods of therapy which are shown, definitely need more studies to show whether it can be used in the future. And definitely more studies are needed to validate the role of biomarkers in treatment response and relapse. Thank you.